Kevin, we were just finding our footing coming out of the pandemic with the news of Russia's war on Ukraine. It's highlighted global uncertainty, supply chain issues, inflation. Canada has had a leading role in the war on Ukraine with Budget 2022 around the corner. As you see it, will defense spending be a main ingredient?
I think it has to be, Larysa, and I think there's every reason to think it will be. You've already seen some of the typical sort of pre-budget murmurs, whispers coming out of Ottawa, talking about the federal government getting serious about Canada's place in the world. That, to me, is code for increased budget spending around the military. This is something that people have been asking for a long time. I mean, obviously, the situation in Ukraine has galvanized the thinking in Ottawa. If there was any sort of naivete or complacency around these ideas left, that's gone now. It's been an opportunity to focus in on some things that we really needed to be doing for a long time now, given the obvious aggression that we're seeing out of China. It's sort of posture that it's taking toward the world. Now we see what's going on around Russia. The Middle East has become more and more volatile, or at least harder to predict. So it's just more and more reasons. And I think finally, as I said, the Russia situation has been the tipping point, the last straw, I guess you could say, in whatever argument that was going on about the need to get Canada's defense spending to an appropriate level. And I'm sure the target will be that sort of 2% of GDP commitment that we've failed to meet for a long time in regards to NATO. But I'm pretty sure the government will take us there in the budget this week.
Let's talk about some of the other ingredients expected to make Budget 2022. Inflation, of course, also top of mind. Canada's economy saw a fairly solid Q1, but of course, with all those numbers pushing up higher, how will the government address inflation?
Well, I hope the government will address inflation by taking itself out of the economy, at least somewhat. And what I mean by that is by pulling itself out of the economy in terms of stimulus, all the stimulus that is provided to get the economy through the recession related to the pandemic. All those things were necessary. The government erred on the side of growth, erred on the side of overshooting what might be necessary rather than holding back and risking some people being left behind. People have different ideas about that approach. I think it's hard to argue, given the circumstances, given the unprecedented nature of the pandemic and everything that's gone on around there, that it was a mistake to overdo it. However, I think we've reached a stage where we can see, given the inflation backdrop, that the federal government should be feeling some pressure to pull back that sort of discretionary stimulus about as quickly as it initiated it back in the early phases of the pandemic. So I think that would be a good start. And then I'm sure there's some other things that the federal government is thinking about and could do to alleviate the situation. One, for example, there could be some measures in the pipeline, perhaps to ensure that Canadians sort of leave some of that money that they've built up during the pandemic in the bank. That'll take it out of the economy and take some of the demand pressure off the inflationary situation. Something else the government hopefully is also thinking about are various measures to improve the country's productivity, its competitiveness. Measures along those lines would go a long way to increasing the capacity in the economy, and that too would alleviate some of the inflationary pressures. That's longer term, though. That's not going to happen overnight.
The Bank of Canada doing its job with respect to raising interest rates. How will this ultimately, I guess, play into the entire narrative with the budget and housing affordability?
That makes some people a bit nervous because the political class will feel an impulse to respond to that affordability crisis, and I think it has probably reached a crisis level across the country. When politicians have responded in the past, they've tended to do so on the demand side, and of course, the demand side is just adds more fuel to the fire. So I really hope that we've learned our lessons, that these sort of these tax breaks and what have you meant to at least make us feel like housing is going to be more affordable in the short term, just to end up making the situation worse. So I sense that the federal government is keen to that. They understand this. You see the rumors and the suggestions in the Liberal government's program from the election campaign, for example, are really sort of putting a greater emphasis on supply. That should help, but again, you can't build hundreds of thousands of houses immediately. So I don't know that that's going to make a big short-term difference. That's really going to have to come from the Bank of Canada by raising interest rates and getting mortgage rates ultimately a little bit higher to, again, take some of that demand pressure off.
Let's get into some of the other priorities in the budget: innovation, carbon, this protectionist notion of made in Canada.
Indeed, yeah, that's another impulse. Again, there'd be a lot of people out there that would caution the government from going too far down that road. Lots of opportunity to mess up the economy by, a dab of a tax break here, or another dab of a surplus, or a surplus. We're not going to see a surplus for a while, obviously, Larysa, but some subsidy programs here and there to boost various industries. But you can see, certainly we saw it again recently with the announcement by Ontario and federal government and putting some money into GM, or giving some incentives to GM to ramp up its production of electric vehicles in Canada. You're going to see things like that. You're going to see some efforts to sort of bolster and boost that supply chain from ground to factory floor, and I suppose even to the retail level, to get incentives to start getting the minerals that we need to build the batteries needed for the electric vehicles. We have that in Canada. We don't have the capacity to mine those minerals to the extent that we need at this point. So I'm sure you'll see some stimulus around that to get that going. And then all the way along the chain, but for sure, you definitely see all the signals that there's an impulse out there to build up the supply chains, make Canada and its allies, North America in particular, less reliant on sourcing these sorts of things from Asia and other places.
Just before we let you go, you had somewhat touched on this, the deficit.
Yeah, indeed. It's almost given all this going on in the world, we've stopped talking about it almost. I mean, it's big. I guess I personally think that probably a little more emphasis put on it than perhaps necessary. But again, that argument is getting hard to make. The reason it's getting hard to make is because interest rates, of course, are starting to rise, and we can't be certain on just how high the central banks are going to push interest rates to get a handle on the inflation that we see going on. Best case scenario, we should be okay, but you need to plan for more than the best case, obviously. And so, of course, that matters, Larysa, because the reason we've been able to afford all this spending is because interest rates have been so low. That era would appear to be over, which means we need to take more seriously the possibility that the cost of servicing the debt is on the rise, and so we need to think more carefully about how much we're going to spend in concert with trying to manage the deficit and the debt at the same time.